Yeah, my name is Ken Robinson. I'm the owner of MAKZ Insurance. I've been doing insurance for about 10 years now, and love what I do. Love assisting people. You definitely want to get your standard HO3 policy, which is going to cover the structure of the building. It'll also cover your personal property. It'll cover liability. If someone is hurt on your property, it'll cover that as well. And I recommend definitely everyone should get flood insurance. I know there are a lot of rumors and things of that nature out there that not every part of Houston is a flood zone, but I always kind of recommend that we kind of live in a bayou, so it can flood anywhere. So as long as you're living in the city, you definitely should have flood insurance, because at any time, it just takes one heavy rainstorm and you're flooded. So, and your homeowner's policy does not cover flood insurance at all. So you must have flood insurance in order to get covered. Same thing. So if you were to get a renter's policy for living in an apartment, or if you get a condo policy for living in a condo, that still only covers your personal property and things of that nature. You still do not, flood does not cover that at all. You still would need a separate flood policy in order to have flood coverage if in the event you were flooded. Actually, when you're speaking with your realtor, their realtor actually should have that information. And if they do not have that information, there are some websites online that allow you to put that information in and see if it's in a flood zone. I personally don't say something is or is not in a flood zone. I say is in a high risk or low risk flood zone, because I do believe the entire city is a flood zone, because again, we do live in a Gulf state, and because of our distance to the coast, it's very close. So at any time you can be flooded. So you really want to check if you're in a high risk zone or a low risk zone. And how you do that is based off alphabets. If you're in an X, as in X-ray, that's going to be an ideal zone, meaning that the chances of you being flooded are slimmer. But if you're in an AE zone, which is alpha elephant, or B as in boy, if you're in one of those two zones, typically your mortgage is going to require you to have flood insurance anyway, because you are in a high risk zone. So typically, if your mortgage doesn't require it, it's a high chance that you are in a low risk zone. But if you want to be sure, you can definitely go online. I know FEMA is a great website that you can put the address in and get some great information on. And I don't want to get too technical with it, but it's based off the 100-year flood plan. So when a surveyor does the inspection, and they'll let you know right then and there on that flood certificate if you're in an X zone, AE zone, etc. And the closer you get to the coast, like Galveston, Kemah, Crystal Beach, things like that, it then turns to A1, A2, etc. And those different numbers is just speaking of how high risk that property is. So the mortgage is going to know if you're in a high risk zone or not, because they want to make sure that the loan is covered. So if they don't require it, the chances are you are in a low risk zone and not a high risk zone. There's nothing illegal by that. I mean, and unfortunately, with the last couple of floods that have happened over the last 5 years or so, some areas that were initially not in high-risk zones are now in those zones. Like, for instance, properties that are located in a Maryland area or near I-10 in the Bear Creek area. A lot of those areas were not high-risk zones initially because they're by bayous and so forth. But over the last couple of years with the floods that we have had in the city, those areas are now in AE zones. So those properties initially, those homeowners bought those properties, they were in low risk zones, but now they're not. So, and then some areas that were in high risk zones, I've been seeing some areas that have fallen into low risk. Like over the last 5 years, they haven't flooded. So those areas have actually got credited for not flooding. So It's really hard to say with what's going on in the city, things being built up, things like that. It's just best to verify the information. If that is a determining factor for you buying a property, then yeah, I would just verify to see if you're in a high risk zone or low risk zone. What I would definitely recommend is when you're getting that quote, actually ask your agent or broker to see the replacement cost calculator or estimate. A lot of times that is what the premium is based off, amongst other things, but a lot of times it's your coverage A, which is your building coverage. That's the main number on your policy coverage limit there. That number kind of determines what the rate is going to be based off, how much coverage is being applied to that property. So if I get this question a lot of times, well, I only purchased a home for $100,000. Why are you insuring it for $200,000? Or I've had even the opposite question of, I purchased a home for $1 million, but the replacement cost is only $300,000. So on the first side of, I purchased it for $100,000 and it's being covered for $200,000. So that is based off the actual cost to replace the home in the event you have a total loss. So if you were to have a total loss and the insurance company needs to come back in and rebuild the entire home, it's based off a couple factors. Is the home made out of brick? Is it made out of stucco? Is it made out of frame? Then they ask about flooring. Is it wood flooring, hardwood? Is it carpet, stone, etc.? How many bathrooms is it? How many kitchens? Is it builder's grade, custom, designer? So all those factors are how we get to the replacement cost of a home. Now, on the other side of, I have $1 million home, but it's only being covered for $300,000. So insurance does not actually cover your land. So a lot of times when these properties are like in River Oaks, Bel Air area, the land itself may be $500,000 and the property might be just $300,000, or the land is $700,000, etc. So insurance will not cover the land. They will not cover that home for $1 million if the cost to replace it is actually only $300,000. Because again, you can't replace land. It kind of is what it is in that sense. So that's one of the main things I speak with when I speak with the clients who normally do have higher value homes. They want to, insure it for that value, which a lot of times it is if they have like designer kitchens and bathrooms and hardwood flooring and etc. But a lot of times when it's just more of a generic basic home and the land is just very expensive, the insurance company will not insure that for the full cost, because the land is why it's actually, the purchase price was actually more than what the actual property was. So I hope that kind of makes sense. As far as the structure itself, finding out what the replacement cost is the best way to figure out how much coverage you actually need for your property. Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you why. So a lot of people, unfortunately, when going into the home buying process, they're looking at, I just wanna make sure that my loan is covered. So a lot of times if they bought the home for, a standard home in Houston is about $200,000, $250,000, whatever the case is. So they bought the home for $250,000, and then the loan is for say $200,000. A lot of times they're just wanting that $200,000 to be covered because their thought process is, once I pay off the home, I'm good to go. But a lot of times when they do that, they're wanting the very, very bare minimum coverage because they're trying to keep the cost down for the actual premium for the policy. But like you stated, what happens when you do that a lot of times, you are, shortchanging yourself and make sure you have the adequate amount of property coverage, because a true replacement cost normally is about $100 per square foot. And then you kind of go from there. And then the minimum would be $85 per square foot. So I would recommend anyone, if you were to get the square footage of your home and multiply it by 0.85, if your property is underneath that number, you're definitely not insured for enough. If it's right at that number, you have the bare minimum. You really want to do $100 per square foot. So if your home is 2,000 square foot, you really want to have at least $200,000 worth of coverage and up. Anything below that, it's honestly going to be under valued. So that's how that's a quick way to kind of do math on, are you properly insured or not with the right coverage? When you put yourself beneath it, because the cost of goods, normally when a hurricane hits, some type of natural disaster hit, the cost of goods, like the cost of materials, be it wood, stone, concrete, things of that nature, that cost goes up as well. So that's why a lot of times the replacement cost is not actually enough, because you're not taking into account that what it might have cost 5 years ago to replace your home has actually increased 25, 30%, because the cost of material has increased over those years as well. There is a coverage that most policies have where you have coverage A, which is your limit for the property, and there is an endorsement that allows you to add additional coverage A amounts, and that normally comes in a percentage. So it's normally 10%, 25%. Some policies even allow up to 50%. So you could have that endorsement added to your policy. So it does kind of blanket you in the event that cost of materials increase and you might have a claim in 5 years. Mm-hmm. So that additional coverage A endorsement will cover that increase that has taken place over the course of time. So that is an endorsement you can add to your policy to cover that. Flood insurance covers pretty much flood. So I like to pretty much say it to kind of make it simple and not really confuse people. Any water that's coming from outside the home into the home is flood. A lot of times people get confused, of a pipe bust in my home, or it floods my home, am I covered? No, that's your homeowner's policy. So think of it this way. Any water that comes from outside the home, inside, be it from a lake, ditch overflow, hurricane, heavy rain, river, whatever the case may be, that's all considered flood. Anything inside the home going out, that's homeowners. So that's the way to kind of decide if you have a flood claim or not. What floods covers, it covers your structure. So your sheetrock, your flooring, things of that nature, all your structure. And then if you put personal property coverage on it, it will then cover your personal property as well. Your televisions, your couches, your clothing, things of that nature. So there are some flood policies that you can get just structure only with no personal property. I would not recommend that to anyone, but there are some people who do it. But it's up to you as the insured if you decide to go that route. I recommend to never not cover your personal property, because if it floods and your personal property is damaged and you don't have the proper coverage, you're not covered. So I definitely recommend everyone be sure to add personal property to your flood insurance. So there are two main options. So there's the FEMA policy, which everyone is familiar with through the National Flood Insurance Program. That's your standard policy that you can get. And those rates are pretty much, there's one rate across the entire state, pretty much across the country. So you can call 100 agents and all 100 agents will give you the exact same rate, because that is, FEMA makes a standard rate, and then that's just what they charge per the property. So that's the most common policy that everyone goes with. But now lately, especially with the different regulations and things like that that's going on with FEMA and the National Flood Program, there are now starting to become private companies who are now allowing flood insurance programs. So you have like Lloyd's of London that does private flood insurance. I apologize. You have Hitchcock's that does it, Neptune. It's a host of others that are starting to come out and allowing you to have a private insurance program. So those companies rate their premiums based off whatever their criteria is. So you might have a quote from the National Flood Program at $425 for the year, and you might have a quote from the private insurance for $415 for the year, or it might be $435. It just depends on how they rate their premium. So it just depends. Some mortgage companies accept private, some don't. So I would recommend, if you do go the private way, just speak to your mortgage, see if it's allowed. And if so, then I recommend everyone get a private flood quote and a National Flood Program quote. But if it really is determined if your mortgage allows it. But if you purchased your home cash, or you own your home flat out, then you can choose whichever route you choose to go. I have clients who have National Flood and private, so It's really just based off the individual property itself. Some flood policies do replacement costs, and some are actual cash value on your personal property. So I would just verify which you have, as far as what coverage you have on your policy, so you kind of know what you're dealing with. And then I recommend everyone to definitely make a video journal if you could. Now, clothes and things of that nature, it's going to be kind of hard to distinguish because that, depreciation happens over the years. But anything like televisions, couches, mattresses, big purchases, things of that nature, you definitely want to, if you can, keep a copy of the receipt or take a picture of it at least. Just kind of keep that maybe on a USB or in a cloud. Because one of the main things, the last thing you want to be trying to do is trying to find photos in a flood. So if you can put it, maybe email it to yourself. That way it's accessible, very quickly. I would recommend that. And then that way you can make sure you're getting a fair claim done. But a lot of times if you don't have that information documented, it's kind of hard to say, oh, I had a $5,000 television when you don't have proof of it. Flood insurance is going to be based off a couple of factors. So the first factor is going to be how much coverage you actually need. So that's going to be determined on the size of your home. So if you have a $100,000 home, or you will then get $100,000 in flood insurance, and then kind of go up from there. So first, figure out what the replacement cost in your home is. The max that you can get with the National Flood Program is $250,000. So if you have a $500,000 home, the max they would cover is $250,000. So in this type of instance, what I would recommend is you then get what is called an excess policy. It's almost like an umbrella policy for flood. So you will have your $250,000 from the National Flood Program, and then your excess policy will cover the additional on top of it. So if the max is $250,000, then if you want to make sure you have a $500,000 coverage, you would then get an excess policy of an additional $250,000, and then that would give you $500,000. And how that normally works is the National Flood Program will pay out first. Anything that exceeds that, the access policy would then cover the additional. So that's for larger homes. So if flood insurance always wants you to increase, they always want you to have, adequate amount of coverage. They really don't want you to be underinsured. Decrease, if it's a mortgage on it, no, they won't allow you to do that because that loan is still being covered. If you own the home outright and you want to just cover $100,000, but your home is worth $500,000, you as the homeowner have that. That's up to you. Would I recommend that? Not at all. But again, it's your property, so maybe you're just concerned about just your flooring getting flooded or whatever the case may be. So if you choose to do that, you can. So you can definitely decrease it if you own it out. But a lot of times, in most instances where there's a mortgage in place, they will not allow you to decrease flood insurance at all. So if you're living in one now and you have a mortgage, more than likely you'd have got a letter in the mail stating that you have to get flood insurance. Because what happens with the remapping, that's when zones change. It's called remapping. So when the remaps happen, a lot of times the mortgages are alerted of that information. So then they require you to get it. Again, you can visit the FEMA website, put your address in, see if it gives you a high risk zone or a low risk zone. If it gives you the low risk zone, you're still good to go. If it gives you a high risk zone, then yeah, I would definitely recommend you get that policy in place because again, homeowners, I just have to really stress that multiple times, that homeowners insurance does not cover flood insurance. And then the thing about it that I try to tell people a lot of times, especially hurricane season is getting ready to start here in a couple of weeks, June the 1st. And I like to tell people ahead of time that with most policies, especially flood policies, there's a 30-day waiting period. So if you buy your policy today, it literally will not start until 30 days. So if you are flooded within those 30 days, you're not covered. So we always recommend that people get it early. Don't wait till it's hurricane season, because I remember when Harvey was coming, there were people calling in to try to get flood insurance. And it was like, you can get it, but you're not going to get covered because there's a 30-day wait period. And people really didn't understand that. But they do that intentionally because for their very reason, they don't want a hurricane to be on the in the ocean, getting ready to hit the next day, and then they get bombarded with policies and have to pay out. They would go bankrupt if they did that. So what they do is make you have that 30-day waiting period, so that is avoided. On the flip side of that, most private floods don't have a waiting period, or they have only a 10-day waiting period. Some might have a 15-day waiting period. And then there are some that have no waiting periods at all. So that's the thing about private flood. They're just a little more flexible with things, unless you're moving in your home. If your home is a brand new purchase, then the policy can start the day you move in, because that's different. It's only when you've already lived in a home and then you're trying to get a policy. The hurricane or storm was hitting on a Friday and you were moving in on a Thursday. As long as you buy that policy and started on Thursday, you're covered, because it was a new purchase. The home is a new purchase for you. And they do verify that. They do go to the appraisal district to see when you actually purchased the home. So if they go to your appraisal district and they pull up your address and they see that you purchased a home 2 years ago, that claim will be denied, because that was not the standard 30-day waiting period.
You told me I'm your anchor, I told you you're my pole. Through the wind and fire we try to hold on. We build this ship together, searching for a home.